Okay. So we're going to talk about creating the Constitution, and the part we're talking about today are the Articles of Confederation. So you guys should have maybe watched, there were 2 ed puzzles that you needed to do on the Revolutionary War. If you haven't done those, they're in the margins in Schoology on the right-hand side where things that are due. And so after the Revolutionary War, the first thing that we needed to do was to build a government. So the first thing that we did was write the Articles of Confederation. I'm going to just go down here. So we looked at those things we talked about yesterday. Our nation looked at the Magna Carta, the English Bill of Rights, and they also looked at what had already been written in the colonies. And states felt that was really important that they stayed their own authority, meaning that the states were worried that if there was a strong central government, it would end up being like a tyranny where you'd have a king or a president that ran the whole country, and they didn't want that. So what they did is created the Articles of Confederation, where you're not going to have a strong federal government. So the Articles of Confederation were weak on purpose. Americans were afraid of a strong national government because they just fought a war of it. So they wanted a weak national government. Unlike we have today, they wanted a government where the states retained a lot of power. Just one second. Destiny, are you paying attention? Okay. The national government under the Articles did not have the power to tax or enforce laws. So when there's no tax, what happens? If we're not paying taxes to the government, how does the government run? Poorly, because they're not getting any money coming in. So if the government has no money, they can't even pay the employees working at the government. So that was a huge problem. The power to tax was left up to the states, but the states didn't have to give any of the money they taxed to the federal government. So problem. The national government did have power to wage war, but since it couldn't tax, they didn't have a way to pay for it. And the government could issue money, but the states didn't have to use it, so they had their own. So basically, back then it would have been like if Wisconsin had its own form of money and Illinois had its own form of money, but you had to like exchange money when you went over the border. So the states all had different kinds of money, currency, which was a huge problem. So the Articles established a firm legal friendship among the states, meaning that they all agreed to get along with one another. Bills were passed on 9 of 13 votes, meaning you needed 9 out of the 13 colonies to agree on something. But amending or changing the Articles of Confederation would take unanimous vote, meaning all 13 colonies had to decide on it.
I was wondering if anyone else wanted to do, because if we're only 4 people, then it's 6 votes for having a full one.
No, it's fine. Okay, so there was no power to raise funds for an army. So you didn't have taxes, no money. No power to tax or impose tariffs or collect duties. So there's no way to tax things coming into the nation or going out of the nation. There was no executive branch. There was no president when the Articles of Confederation was written. There was no power to control trade among the states, so they could make their own rules, which you'll see was a problem later. There was no power for the federal government to make the states do anything they wanted. And when you think about the Civil War and ending slavery, if the Articles of Confederation hadn't been changed, the southern states could still have slavery today. There was no power to regulate the value of currency because every state was different. So there was lots and lots of problems with the Articles of Confederation. More problems. Trade with foreign nations. We could trade with foreign nations, but there was no power to set tariffs, which was money to tax. And there was no really control over what was going out and what was coming in. foreign relations weren't great because there was no executive branch. And in our government today, the president deals with foreign relations, or the executive branch does. And there was no executive branch. Financing the nation with tax money didn't exist because there was no taxes from the federal government. So in order to have something like interstate travel, that had to be done by the states. And since there was no federal branch that could regulate that. And they also couldn't regulate state-to-state relationships. So back then, if Virginia got mad at North Carolina, there was no federal branch or federal power to step in and say, hey, you guys need to get along. Here's some power with trade. So obviously Great Britain, who we had sent a lot of our exports to, was ticked at us because we just won a war against them. So, but U.S. exports to British ports had to be on British ships, which was a problem. The U.S. produced goods, but they were barred from British ports, so we had no way to sell our goods overseas. So we were losing income that way. The Brits, on the other hand, were sending cheap goods to the United States, and people were buying them because they were cheaper than things they could get in America. There were no established tariffs on British goods, and weaknesses in the Articles of Confederation prevented this solution. There is a video here. I'm not going to show it, but if you guys want to watch it, I'll make sure that you guys have this article or this slideshow in a bit. Some good things that happened is we negotiated a treaty, the Treaty of Paris with Britain in 1783. So basically, after that treaty was established, America was free from Great Britain, and Great Britain would basically not try to have a war with us again. And relations got better as we progressed into the 1800s. They established the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which gave us some land. You won't have to know that. It's just another thing. This is just a political cartoon saying rough sailing ahead because we couldn't do a lot of these things. This is a slide. I'm not going to read through it, but this might help you when you're taking that quiz. It's weaknesses. Actually, one of the questions is about the weaknesses. And then what was the outcome? What was the result of that weakness? Another example, and I had mentioned, and this is in the quiz, is Shays' Rebellion. So let me talk a little bit about what that was about. Here's Daniel Shays. Why is this? Oh, here we go. He was a captain of the Revolutionary War, retired from the army, and wanted to be a farmer. And he had been promised they were promised some things from the government. The government, because they couldn't raise any money, backed off on those things. One of the things was, without property, farmers couldn't feed their families. And even though some of the people fighting in the war had been promised property, they didn't get it. Without property, farmers couldn't vote, they couldn't make money, they couldn't pay the taxes that were in their states, and so that they were throwing people in jail that had fought in the war, and now they couldn't pay them for it. So Daniel Shays and a bunch of farmers picked up their guns, went to the courthouse, and said, we're going to start a rebellion unless you pay us. Because they were losing their homes and their farms. The action pushed many towns in Massachusetts close to anarchy, or basically there was no law and order there. That's just a picture. Shays' Rebellion made the people and governments nervous. It also worried large landowners. The government of Massachusetts made new laws that were meant to punish Shay and his followers, which pissed more people off. Shay and his men obviously lost the battle. They were just farmers with pickaxes and shovels. Well, they had guns too. But the militias that were there stopped the rebellion from happening, and some of them were actually given the death penalty for having participated in the rebellion because they called it treasonous. What the result of this was, when you're talking about the Articles of Confederation, was that it was the thing that kind of came to head and said, this new government is way too weak, and we need a stronger national government. Since the Articles of Confederation did not give Congress the power to raise a standing army, the federal government couldn't help. People began worrying that rebellions like this would pop up all over the country. And also, we realized that we weren't providing for the people in our nation. Yeah, Destiny.
I think they also they can't deliver to our school. Like, but it's delivered before.
Okay, hold on. When I'm done with this,
Yeah.
we can talk about that. And I think that's the last slide. So this just goes through what the Articles of Confederation were, what it could and couldn't do, and the problems that were raised by it. So do you guys have any questions?
I don't.
Anybody? Destiny, do you have any questions? And we can talk about it after too. Okay, all right. So you guys should be able to answer all the answers or all the questions on that quiz now. And I'm here until noon today. I've got another student coming in that I'll be doing a meet with at noon. But I will just plan on seeing you guys tomorrow. If you have any questions, let me know. But try and get those ed puzzles from yesterday, or there's maybe one from yesterday, and then the quiz for today. It's just 10 questions, and like I said, you should be able to go in there and answer those questions now. And I'm gonna, as soon as I get off with you guys, I'm gonna put this slideshow in today's folder so that you guys can access this slideshow. Sound good?